So today and all this week, this is going to be what we're focusing on. Today's focus is going to be on what does it mean to have a responsive mindset. Sorry, I've got a cat behind me. A responsive mindset is simply a way of thinking about your classroom management. So I'm going to be using this acronym, CPR. It is not something I found online. It's not in any of the books. It's just something that I've compiled from the readings I've been doing on classroom management. And we're going to go through each one at a time to see what they mean. So where does this come from? Some of it comes from the information in our book, but then you'll see there are two other sources here that I found that were really helpful for me with classroom management, as well as a small book that I don't have pictured called Tried and True. So that's the sources for today. So CPR, to keep your class under control. C stands for conscientiousness. What does it mean to be conscientious? Conscientious has a lot of synonyms when it comes to teaching. We can be referring to the fact that you're doing things purposefully with a plan in mind. Also, that you're being caring and compassionate towards your students, that you're thinking about how they feel, that you're trying to be respectful in how you teach and responsible. A lot of things, as you can see, go along with being conscientious. So, a conscientious mindset. Part of this is the idea of, are you approaching your students in a reactive way? Meaning, are you simply reacting to the problems that you see? They have a problem, you react. They have a problem, you react. Usually those teachers are giving threats, or they're yelling, or they're constantly doling out consequences. Or a conscientious way is to be responsive, to think about how can I support my students? How can I be helpful? How can I create a class where there are going to be fewer issues? So responsive versus reactive. Another part of having a conscientious mindset is thinking about your students, that you need to have empathy for all of your students. And you need to recognize that a misbehavior is not just a problem. Too often we see a misbehavior as a fire we need to put out, a problem we need to solve. It is, but it's also an opportunity. It's a learning opportunity for the student, and it's also an opportunity to actually improve the relationship between teacher and student by showing that you care. So how does that work? Part of it is we need to remember there's a reason behind every behavior we see in the classroom. That student that is being a class clown and constantly talking, there's a reason that they're doing that. The student that's being argumentative and giving you a hard time, there's a reason that they're doing that. And if you can understand the reason, the cause and effect, you have a better chance of really helping that student in a long-term situation. Here's some examples. That student that's always messing and clowning around, they probably just want attention. So perhaps you could find another way of getting attention to them that doesn't lead to misbehaviors. At the bottom, the student that's disruptive or fidgety. Yes, they could have attention problems. They could also be bored. So is there a better way of handling that student than just punishing them for being fidgety? So it's the idea of thinking about why they are doing what they're doing and finding a solution, finding perhaps even an outlet, rather than just blanket punishing them and assuming that they're all just doing it because they're being bad. So just something to reflect upon since we're online, but when it comes to your field placement, think about any chronically misbehaving students that you've seen there and ask yourself what might be the root cause of their behavior. And knowing that, what might you have done as their teacher to handle it differently? So, conscientious, again, that idea of really putting thought into what you're doing and being considerate and caring. P stands for prevention, a preventative mindset. Again, that idea of not being reactive, not waiting till it already happens, but trying to prevent it beforehand. Prevention as a mindset. So, there are two ways you can approach classroom management. Let's start with the one up above me, which is discipline approach. This is where you see a lot of teachers that are frustrated and not being very conscientious or preventful. And what they tend to do is they're just reactive, like this picture above me. They're just putting out fires all day. Problem comes up, consequence. Problem comes up, consequence. And you get temporary compliance out of your students. The other side, classroom management, the preventative approach, is the idea of thinking about what can I do to keep these problems from starting in the first place? How can I have a more productive classroom? How can I teach my students self-control and responsibility? I love this old quote from Benjamin Franklin. I'm sure we've all seen it before. Whoops, I didn't mean to go by it so quickly. But again, that idea of just putting in a little bit of time on the front end, thinking about prevention in the classroom can save you so much time later down the road. I like this quote too, the idea that discipline should be proactive, focusing on preventing conflicts and disruptions, not just punishing misbehavior, and that our goal should be teaching self-control. The way we'll be looking at this week, again, today is looking at a responsive mindset to get us in the right frame of mind. Wednesday is going to be procedures and rules, and Friday is going to be handling consequences for rule breaking. All right, so prevention is a mindset, some things to think about. To think about your seating and room arrangement before the class even starts. Okay, so to think about how do I want my seats to be arranged? Where do I want my students to sit? I highly recommend assigned seating. If you let them sit wherever they want to sit, they're going to sit next to their friends and then they're going to talk. So think about what you can do to minimize distractions by your seating arrangements. Another thing that also fits with seating arrangements is proximity control. You want to be physically close to your students. You want to be able to see them. You want to be able to reach them. We'll talk about nonverbal cues you can use by the end of this week. So, how do you want to arrange your room to make this happen? So, this picture behind me, I love a horseshoe because students can see one another, they can see you, but this one is so crowded, you would have a hard time really reaching students in the back if you needed to, if you need to go and tap on their desk or hand them something. So think about proximity control. Another thing to think about in the world of prevention is it's a term called with itness. And what with itness means is you want students to recognize that you are aware of what's going on, kind of like you have eyes in the back of your head, right? That you are aware of what's happening in your classroom. And if they feel that way about you, they will be less likely to try things behind your back or to break rules. And you also want to pay attention to warning signs. You'll notice typically something happens before the class gets out of control. So stop it before it gets out of control, before it becomes a problem. When that volume level starts to go up in the class, stop it before it gets too high. Don't wait until the problem is smacking you in the face. If you see one student start to act up, again, nip it in the bud before three students are acting up. So pay attention to those warning signs. And I love this one. I saw this one in the How to Prevent a Noisy Class book. The idea of be vigilant, and it says, what you miss persists. And what that means is every time you let a student get away with something, you are implicitly telling them that it's okay to do it and they can do it again. So think of it this way. You say, no cell phones allowed. We're in ninth grade, no cell phones. And the first time one of your students gets out their phone and they slide it under their desk and they're using it and you see it, but you don't see anything, you don't say anything, that's the same thing as rewarding them. The studies show it's like you've just told them it's okay because there was no consequence. And then look at the second bullet point. Everyone else who sees that goes, oh, well, they got away with it, so I can get away with it too. So what you miss will persist. All right, so we've seen C, we've seen P, now it's time for R, relationships. Having a mindset where relationships are important. And there are two types of relationships, between the teacher and the student, and then between the students themselves. So most studies that I've seen say that teacher-student relationship can be your number one secret ingredient to having a good classroom management system. You want your students to respect you. That is more important than whether or not they like you. Usually, if they respect you, they're going to like you as well. But you want to build that connection. And I think it's interesting to think of a relationship like a bank account. The idea that the more you give, the more you're going to get back. So you want to be a bucket filler. You want to let your students know that you're glad to see them, that you're interested in their learning, you're interested in them as a whole person, and that you're there to make them feel good and want to learn. We have to give in order to receive. So, how do we do this? One of the ways we do this is we just simply show them that we care. Ask about them, talk to them, sit down with them at lunch, do morning meetings if that's something that your classroom does. I know a lot of elementary classes do that. Some little things you can do to show that you care. Greet them at the door. That's such a little thing, but studies have found that by greeting your students at the door, you increase their engagement and they will like school more. I mean, wow, just by greeting them at the door. Sit with them at lunchtime. Listen to them. But what about the older students? Some of you, whether you are in special education, middle childhood, AYA, integrated, you're going to be working with older students and they may not necessarily want to have lunch with you. They may not be as interested in connecting with you. There's some interesting approaches that really work well with older students or with students that have a wall up and maybe don't want to connect with you. Here's a few. All right, so the first one, ask a favor. Ask a small, appropriate favor of the student. Can I borrow your pen for a moment? Or maybe something like, oh, would you mind getting out your phone if they have phones and they're allowed to have them? Could you check the weather for me? I want to see what it's going to be like at recess today. So why would you ask them a favor? By asking them a favor, what happens psychologically is if you do a favor for someone, you tend to like them more because otherwise you're going to have cognitive dissonance because unconsciously you're going to be thinking, why would I do a favor for someone I don't like? It's actually also a salesman's technique as well. So ask a small favor. Ask them for advice. That shows that you care about their opinion and you value what they have to say. Lend them something special. You know, you saw a button that you just think they would really love, or here's my special pen. I noticed you use gel pens. This gel pen is fantastic. You're welcome to use it today if you want. The one in the corner over there, give them a compliment. Have you ever seen the way a student's face changes when you compliment them? Tell them that you just love their tennis shoes, you think they're really cool, or wow, their handwriting is so great. Those little things can go a long way. Communicate frequently with them. Talk with them before class, talk with them after class, talk with them about how they're doing or what they're interested in. And when you do communicate with your students, think about how you're doing it. All right, so I'm going to move so you can check out all these memes. Ask yourself if you've ever heard a teacher say one of these things. None of those things are relationship building. All of those things start a power struggle with your students and are a way of saying, I don't care how you feel and I'm in charge. And they don't build relationships. Be respectful. Always be respectful. You never want your students to feel embarrassed or bad or humiliated. And also think about your nonverbals as well, not just what you're saying. And be positive. You don't know what these students are going through at home. You want to be a positive influence in their life. Show that you want to be there. Show that you're interested in what you're teaching. Attitude is everything. Pick a good one. I really like that. You know, students do tend to model what they see, so be positive. Research actually shows, and it's very similar to the results of greeting them at the door. Teachers who are more positive have students who are more on task and like school more. Think about how you give feedback on papers. Do you just write down all the reasons why you take off points? Poor grammar and spelling, need an introduction, don't forget to do this. What you should do in your feedback is use sandwiching. If you've got something critical you need to say, sandwich it with some compliments. So here you can see I started off with a compliment to their paper, added the constructive criticism, and then it ended with something positive. People are more likely to read it that way. Be a good model. Students tend to observe and imitate. We've seen this with social cognitive theory. So be mindful of the way you are acting and recognize that your students will model you. So model the behavior you want to see. And again, it's just food for thought, things to think about when you're in the field. So think about ways that teachers can build those positive relationships and think about things that you might want to do in the future. The other part of relationships, though, is student to student relationships. And we'll be brief on this because we've talked about this in a couple of different chapters. One, though, you definitely want to focus on acquaintance activities to help them get to know one another. These are great the first or second day of school. And then if you have a transfer student come in, I've recommended this before to do them over again, to do things like icebreakers or introduction activities or people hunts. I thought this was cute. So here they have students doing an activity talking about the dangers of spreading rumors to help students to get along. Show and tell is also great for that. It shows the student that you care what they are interested in, and it lets them share that with their peers to get to know one another. And do what you can to foster group cohesion to help your students to get along and work well with one another. To help with group cohesion, they could be working together to build incentives. You could have some sort of a program where you reward them for kindness. And here, compliment boards are great, really from early childhood all the way up through some middle school to get them to focus on saying nice things to one another. Okay, so that is everything for our introduction to Chapter 11 of Responsive Mindset.